"You can't read that," CEO sneers. Waitress translates the contract and walks away a billionaire. The coffee cup trembled in Grace's weathered hands as she wiped down table 12 for the third time that evening. At 36, she'd been serving tables at Morrison's fine dining for nearly 8 years, watching wealthy businessmen in $1,000 suits discuss deals worth more than she'd make in a lifetime. Her fingers, stained from years of carrying heavy trays, moved with practiced precision around the white tablecloth. She'd learned to become invisible, a shadow moving between conversations about mergers and acquisitions, stock options and golden parachutes. But tonight felt different. Tonight, Charles Whitman, the most feared CEO in the city, sat alone at her station, spreading documents across the mahogany table like he owned the place. His silver hair gleamed under the chandelier light as he spoke loudly into his phone, dismissing anyone who questioned his judgment. Grace had no idea that in 20 minutes, this arrogant man would change her life forever, though not in the way either of them expected. "Where are you watching from tonight?" Grace approached Whitman's table with her usual quiet confidence, notepad ready. The dining room buzzed with the gentle clatter of expensive silverware and hushed conversations, but something about this man's presence made the air feel heavier. She'd served him twice before. He never looked at her directly, treating waitstaff like furniture that happened to bring food. "Another scotch, neat," he barked without glancing up from his papers. "And clear these documents to that chair. I need space." As Grace carefully moved the stack of legal papers, her eyes caught familiar terminology scattered across the pages. Contract law, liability clauses, stock transfers. Her heart skipped, but she kept her expression neutral. Years of hiding her past had taught her to wear anonymity like armor. "Will you be dining alone this evening, sir?" she asked politely. Whitman finally looked up, his cold gray eyes scanning her dismissively. "Listen, sweetheart, I'm conducting serious business here. Just keep the drinks coming and stay out of my way." Grace nodded and retreated, but her mind was racing. She'd spent 4 years studying corporate law at Columbia before her father's sudden illness forced her to drop out and support her family. Those documents weren't just any contracts, they were acquisition papers for Morrison's restaurant group, the very chain that employed her. From behind the service station, she watched Whitman make phone call after phone call, his voice growing more agitated with each conversation. She caught fragments. "The old man won't sell. Find another angle. These people don't understand business." When she returned with his second scotch, Whitman was scribbling notes in the margins of a contract, muttering under his breath. His phone rang again, and he answered with barely contained fury. "What do you mean Morrison's daughter showed up? I thought she was out of the picture." He listened for a moment, then slammed his fist on the table, making the scotch glass jump. "Well, find her. Someone that naive won't understand what she's signing anyway." Grace's blood ran cold. Morrison's daughter. That was her, Grace Morrison, daughter of Frank Morrison, who'd built this restaurant empire from a single diner 40 years ago. Her father had been in hospice care for months, and she'd been so focused on his medical bills that she'd completely forgotten about the business inheritance she'd signed away rights to years ago. Or had she? Grace's hands shook as she refilled water glasses at nearby tables, her mind spinning with childhood memories of her father teaching her about the restaurant business. Frank Morrison had always said the empire would be hers someday, but when she'd left law school to care for him, they'd both assumed his business partner would handle everything. She'd signed papers back then, but what exactly had she agreed to? Whitman's voice cut through her thoughts as he spoke into his phone again. "The acquisition's almost complete. Frank Morrison's been incapacitated for months, and his power of attorney thinks these are standard medical expense authorizations." He laughed cruelly. "By tomorrow, I'll own every Morrison's location on the East Coast." The water pitcher nearly slipped from Grace's grip. Her father's business partner, Mr. Henderson, had been bringing her papers to sign for months. Documents he'd claimed were necessary for covering her father's medical bills. She'd trusted him completely, never questioning the legal language she'd once understood perfectly. She approached Whitman's table with forced composure, refilling his scotch glass while straining to read the documents spread before him. Her law school training kicked in automatically, parsing through the dense legal terminology. This wasn't just an acquisition, it was a hostile takeover disguised as medical debt relief. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "I couldn't help but notice these are Morrison's restaurant documents. My father used to work there years ago." Whitman looked up with annoyed surprise. "Your father? Probably some line cook who got fired." He gestured dismissively at the papers. "This is corporate law, sweetheart. Way above your pay grade. You wouldn't understand a word of this even if you could read it properly." Something in his condescending tone ignited a fire Grace hadn't felt since her law school days. She'd spent years feeling invisible, letting people assume she was just another uneducated waitress. But this man was stealing her father's life's work, and he was too arrogant to realize she could see right through his scheme. "You're right," she said with manufactured sweetness. "I probably couldn't understand complex legal language like whereas and heretofore." Whitman chuckled and returned to his papers. "Exactly. Now, unless you're bringing me food, I'd prefer not to be disturbed. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up." Grace walked away, but her mind was already forming a plan. She knew exactly what those documents said, and more importantly, she knew what they didn't say. During her break, Grace sat in her car outside the restaurant, hands trembling as she called her father's lawyer on her old flip phone. The conversation confirmed her worst fears. Henderson had been forging documents for months, using her father's condition to manipulate both of them. Every paper she'd signed, believing it would help pay medical bills, had actually been transferring ownership rights to Whitman's corporation. "Your father's original will leaves everything to you," the lawyer explained gently. "But if these transfer documents are legitimate, you'll lose everything tomorrow when the final papers are filed." Grace closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 8 years of exhaustion settle on her shoulders. She thought about her father lying in that hospital bed, unaware that the empire he'd built with his bare hands was being stolen from under him. She thought about the hundreds of employees who'd lose their jobs when Whitman inevitably gutted the company for parts. She thought about her own dreams, abandoned long ago, of becoming the lawyer who protected people like her family. But as she sat there in the parking lot, watching expensive cars arrive for the dinner rush, something shifted inside her. Her father hadn't raised her to be a victim. Frank Morrison had taught her that sometimes life gives you exactly the tools you need, exactly when you need them, if you're brave enough to use them. She walked back into the restaurant with newfound purpose. Whitman was still at table 12, now meeting with Henderson, who looked nervous and kept glancing around the dining room. Grace approached with her usual waitress smile, but her mind was operating on a completely different level. "Gentlemen, can I offer you our dessert menu tonight?" Henderson startled, recognizing her immediately. "Grace? What are you doing here?" "I work here, Mr. Henderson. Have for 8 years." She kept her voice light, but her eyes were studying the documents now spread between both men. "How's my father doing? I was going to visit him tomorrow after I finish some paperwork." Whitman looked between them with growing suspicion. "You two know each other?" "Grace is Frank's daughter," Henderson said quickly. "But don't worry, she's just a waitress. Dropped out of school years ago. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments." The dismissal in Henderson's voice was the final push Grace needed. These men had built their scheme on the assumption that she was powerless, uneducated, invisible. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Grace excused herself and returned with coffee service, positioning herself where she could clearly see all the documents. Her years of law school training had taught her to read contracts quickly and thoroughly, and what she saw made her heart race with possibility. The transfer documents Henderson had tricked her into signing were indeed devastating, but they contained a critical flaw. Every contract lawyer learns about procedural requirements in their first year, and these documents were missing a crucial element: witness signatures on the power of attorney transfer. Without proper witnessing, the entire chain of ownership transfers was legally invalid. More importantly, she noticed something that made her catch her breath. Her father's original partnership agreement with Henderson included a right of first refusal clause, meaning if Henderson ever tried to sell his partnership stake, Frank Morrison or his heirs had the legal right to buy it first, at market value. Henderson was violating that agreement by selling directly to Whitman. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Grace said, setting down the coffee with steady hands. "I couldn't help but overhear your business discussion. Mr. Henderson, I believe you're forgetting something important about my father's partnership agreement." Both men looked up sharply. Henderson's face went pale, but Whitman just looked annoyed. "What could you possibly know about partnership agreements?" Whitman sneered. Grace smiled calmly. "I know that according to Section 4.2 of the original Morrison-Henderson partnership contract signed in 1987, any sale of partnership interest requires offering right of first refusal to the Morrison family at fair market value. I also know that the power of attorney documents you've been using are invalid because they lack the required witness signatures under New York state law." The silence at the table was deafening. Henderson's mouth opened and closed like a fish, while Whitman's confident expression slowly transformed into something approaching panic. "That's impossible," Whitman said coldly. "You're a waitress. You can't possibly understand." "I understand that you're attempting to purchase a business through fraudulent documentation," Grace interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "I understand that those transfer papers are worthless. And I understand that as Frank Morrison's daughter and legal heir, I'm exercising our right of first refusal to purchase Mr. Henderson's partnership stake. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales." The documents scattered as Whitman stood abruptly, his face red with rage and disbelief. But Grace wasn't finished yet. What happened next would forever change not just Grace's life, but her understanding of her own strength. Henderson, faced with exposure of his fraudulent scheme, broke down completely and confessed everything to avoid criminal charges. The fair market value of his partnership stake, when calculated honestly, was far more than Grace could ever afford on a waitress's salary, but it was also far less than Whitman had been willing to pay for the stolen empire. The resolution came through her father's lawyer, who revealed that Frank Morrison had always planned for this possibility. Hidden in a trust account Grace never knew existed was enough money to exercise the right of first refusal, funds her father had set aside specifically to protect the business if anyone ever tried to steal it from his daughter. 3 months later, Grace stood in her father's hospital room, holding his hand as she told him about saving the family business. Though his speech was limited, the pride in Frank Morrison's eyes said everything. He'd always known his daughter was stronger than she believed, smarter than anyone gave her credit for, and brave enough to fight when it mattered most. The legal proceedings took 6 months to fully resolve. Whitman's attempted acquisition was declared null and void, and Henderson faced both criminal charges and civil penalties. Grace, meanwhile, found herself the majority owner of Morrison's Restaurant Group, a company worth $47 million. But the real transformation wasn't financial. Grace enrolled in night law school to finish her degree, determined to protect other families from predators like Whitman. She kept working in the restaurants, learning the business from the ground up, just as her father had done decades earlier. The employees who'd feared losing their jobs instead found themselves working for someone who understood their struggles intimately. She never forgot the lesson that night had taught her. Sometimes the greatest power comes from being underestimated. Sometimes the people who dismiss you most completely are the ones who've handed you exactly the tools you need to defeat them. On quiet evenings, Grace would sit in the original Morrison's diner where her father had started his empire, reading legal documents by the same window booth where she'd done homework as a child. The mahogany table at Morrison's fine dining was replaced with oak, a warmer, more welcoming surface where business was conducted with respect rather than arrogance. Frank Morrison recovered enough to attend Grace's law school graduation 2 years later. As she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, he beamed with the pride of a man who'd always known his daughter could move mountains. She just needed to remember it herself. The last time anyone checked, Charles Whitman was facing multiple fraud investigations and had lost most of his own business empire. Grace Morrison, attorney and restaurant owner, had built something far more valuable than his stolen wealth, a legacy of justice, family, and the quiet strength that comes from never giving up on who you're meant to be. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for joining Grace on this incredible journey of courage and family love.